600. 600 ballistic missiles, not rockets, not drones, ballistic missiles arcing through the stratosphere at hypersonic speed aimed at a country the size of New Jersey. And that number is still climbing? What is happening right now above the skies of Israel is not a skirmish. It is not a provocation. It is not a warning shot. It is something that military planners in Washington, London, and Beijing have studied in classified war games for decades, and privately prayed would never actually happen, because what comes next changes everything. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, you have arrived at precisely the right moment. This is where conflict, strategy, and the global balance of power are examined with the clarity this moment demands. Now, before going any further, if you are not yet subscribed, please do consider clicking that button. Think of it the way one would remind a grandmother to take her vitamins. She means to. She knows she should. She just sometimes forgets. Don't be like that. Subscribe now, and we will never lose each other. And while you are here, drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from right now? The answer is always more interesting than expected. The strategic architecture of what is now unfolding above Israeli skies did not emerge overnight. It was built layer by layer over more than 4 decades. Calibrated, tested, revised, and expanded by the Islamic Republic of Iran with a singular obsession: the destruction of the Israeli state's capacity to feel safe within its own borders. To understand the full weight of a 600-missile barrage against Israel, one must first understand what Iran's ballistic missile program actually represents at the doctrinal level. This is not a conventional military capability aimed solely at conventional military targets. Iran's missile arsenal was designed, from its earliest inception during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, as both a strategic deterrent and a tool of psychological warfare. The ability to reach Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem from Iranian soil, a range of approximately 1,500 kilometers, was never simply about inflicting damage. It was about communicating an inescapable truth: that geography, however favorable, provides no absolute sanctuary. By the time the conflict that shaped this moment began in earnest, Iran's military intelligence had assessed its ballistic missile stockpile at approximately 2,500 operational ballistic missiles. That figure, cited by the Israel Defense Forces in early March of 2026, represented the culmination of years of accelerated production following a series of devastating setbacks. The 12-day war of June 2025, in which Iran launched over 550 ballistic missiles at Israel within a single 12-day window, had revealed both the scale of Iran's capabilities and the critical vulnerabilities in its launch infrastructure. Israel, assisted by the United States, had dismantled dozens of launchers during that conflict, but Iran had rebuilt, and it had done so faster than Western intelligence services had publicly projected. The war that began on the 28th of February 2026 opened not with a single strike, but with a coordinated campaign of breathtaking scale and ambition. The United States and Israel, under Operations Roaring Lion and Epic Fury, struck Iranian military infrastructure simultaneously across dozens of locations. The declared objective was regime change, not merely the degradation of military capability, but the elimination of the political architecture that directed it. In the opening hours of that campaign, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in an Israeli strike on his command bunker in Tehran. Iranian Defense Minister Aziz Nasrizadeh was killed. IRGC Commander Mohammad Pakpour was killed. Defense Council Secretary Ali Shamkhani was killed. In a single night, the upper echelon of Iran's strategic command structure was effectively decapitated, but a decapitated state does not immediately surrender. A decapitated state, particularly one that has spent 4 decades preparing for exactly this contingency, responds according to preset protocols, pre-programmed launch sequences, and a chain of command designed to function even in the absence of its uppermost tier. Within hours of those initial strikes, Iran's surviving military commanders had authorized a retaliatory barrage that would become the largest single missile assault on the state of Israel in recorded history. What began as a response became a campaign. In the first 10 days of the war, Iran launched salvos of ballistic missiles at Israel with a frequency and scale that taxed the country's multi-layered air defense architecture in ways that had not been anticipated even by its most pessimistic pre-war planners. The Arrow anti-ballistic missile system, designed to intercept Iranian ballistic missiles at altitude, performed at high efficiency. David's Sling, responsible for medium-range interception, absorbed enormous operational demand. Iron Dome, built for shorter-range threats, was simultaneously engaged by Hezbollah rocket fire pouring in from Lebanon's southern border. The Israeli Home Front Command was issuing alerts across the country, sometimes multiple times within a single hour. And it was within this environment of sustained operational pressure that the scenario now unfolding takes on its full strategic weight. Because 600 is not simply a number, it is the calculated threshold at which Iranian military planners believed they could overwhelm Israel's interception systems through sheer volume. Not precision, not stealth, but saturation. The doctrine is known in military theory as volley fire suppression at scale, and it is as ancient as artillery itself. Fire enough rounds fast enough, and some will always penetrate. At 600 missiles arriving in coordinated waves, even a defense system as capable as Israel's faces a mathematical reality that no technology fully resolves. And Hezbollah, launching from the north, is not adding noise to this equation. Hezbollah is adding a second front, a second vector, and a second missile inventory, one that intelligence estimates as of early March 2026, still placed at approximately 25,000 missiles remaining in Lebanon, alongside roughly 1,000 drones and an estimated 3,000 operational fighters. The IDF, fighting simultaneously on two fronts, Lebanon and the broader Iranian theater, had by late March reported the deaths of more than 800 Hezbollah operatives in southern Lebanon. Its ground forces, operating across the full length of the Israel-Lebanon border, had seized members of Hezbollah's elite Radwan force. Those are not insignificant achievements. But they are achievements purchased at cost. Cost measured not only in lives and materiel, but in the relentless, grinding expenditure of interceptor missiles that cannot be replenished at the same rate they are consumed. That asymmetry between Iran's capacity to fire and Israel's capacity to intercept is the central strategic tension of this war, and understanding it is the only way to understand what is truly at stake. There is a dimension of this conflict that Western media coverage has consistently underrepresented, and it is the one that military professionals regard as the most consequential: the economic and logistical mathematics of sustained missile defense. Every Arrow 3 interceptor carries an estimated unit cost of between $1 and $2 million. Every David's Sling interceptor is estimated at approximately $1 million. Iran's ballistic missiles, while sophisticated, are far cheaper to produce in bulk. Some variants in the Shahab family estimated at tens of thousands of dollars per unit. When 600 missiles are launched in a coordinated barrage, the simple act of intercepting them, even at high success rates, can cost Israel and its American partners upward of $500 million in a single engagement. That is not a sustainable arithmetic over an extended campaign. It is a weapon in itself. Not a weapon of destruction, but a weapon of depletion, financial, logistical, and psychological. This was not an improvised calculation by Iran. It was the product of years of deliberate strategy, refined through the careful observation of every conflict in which Israeli air defenses were deployed at scale. Iranian defense planners studied the interception ratios. They modeled the intercept costs. They calculated the threshold at which saturation becomes prohibitively expensive for the defender, even when that defender possesses the most capable missile shield in the world. And they built their arsenal accordingly. It is here that the Hezbollah dimension of this scenario becomes not merely militarily significant, but strategically decisive. Hezbollah's missile and rocket inventory represents a second-front saturation threat that Israel's air defense architecture was not designed to absorb simultaneously with a full-scale Iranian ballistic missile campaign. The Arrow system is oriented toward the east, toward Iran, toward Yemen's Houthi launches. Iron Dome and David's Sling handle Lebanon. When both fronts are active simultaneously, the demands on command and control, on interceptor inventory, and on the human operators managing these systems become exponentially more complex. The IDF has struck Beirut's southern suburbs repeatedly. It has hit the Bekaa Valley with sustained air operations. It has eliminated senior Hezbollah commanders, including Hussein Makhled, the head of Hezbollah's intelligence headquarters. But Hezbollah's military architecture, rebuilt painstakingly after the 2006 Lebanon War and again after the losses of the 2024 conflict, was specifically engineered to survive leadership decapitation and continue operating at the unit level. Its tunnel networks, its dispersed launch sites, its hardened storage facilities, these were not designed for a centrally commanded conventional army. They were designed for a distributed insurgency with strategic missile capabilities. When IDF ground forces captured 2 Radwan Force operatives in southern Lebanon in late March, members of Hezbollah's most elite ground attack unit, the significance went beyond tactical intelligence. The Radwan Force was originally trained for precisely this kind of combined arms scenario, coordinating anti-tank missile fire, guided rocket barrages, and ground infiltration operations to overwhelm IDF defensive positions along the border during a moment of maximum pressure from the east. The fact that these operatives were still active, still planning operations in the 4th week of the war, speaks to the resilience of a force that was built for exactly this moment. Meanwhile, the broader regional theater was generating pressures that no single war map could fully contain. The Houthi movement in Yemen, which had largely paused its operations against Israeli territory since October 2025, had by late March resumed ballistic missile and cruise missile launches toward Eilat. In isolation, those attacks are absorbed. In the context of a military machine already engaging a 600-missile Iranian barrage and simultaneous Hezbollah fire from the north, every additional engagement is another demand on the system, another reduction in interceptor inventory, another alarm sounding in a country where the civilian population has been living in and out of bomb shelters for weeks. The psychological dimension of sustained multi-front missile warfare should never be reduced to a footnote in strategic analysis. It is in itself a form of warfare. one that Iran's strategists have studied with as much deliberateness as any battlefield commander. Here's the cold fact that no amount of political framing changes. A missile that strikes near the Dimona nuclear facility in the Negev desert is not a tactical event. It is a strategic signal of the most serious kind. On the 22nd of March 2026, 2 Iranian ballistic missiles struck the southern Israeli cities of Dimona and Arad. The Israeli Air Force confirmed that David's Sling, the mid-tier layer of Israel's missile defense, had failed to intercept either projectile. The investigation into those failures determined that the 2 incidents were unrelated in cause. The missiles carried conventional warheads, but Dimona is not a conventional city. Dimona is the location of Israel's Negev Nuclear Research Center, the facility that, for over 6 decades, has been the operational and symbolic heart of Israel's undeclared nuclear deterrent. The fact that Iranian ballistic missiles reached Dimona, however conventional their payload in this instance, constituted a threshold crossing of profound strategic significance. It demonstrated that Iran's military planners were targeting Israel's nuclear infrastructure deliberately, precisely, and with missiles capable of defeating the most sophisticated missile shield ever deployed in the region. This is the layer of the conflict that most analysis has failed to articulate with sufficient clarity. The 600-missile barrage is not simply a massive act of military aggression. It is a direct challenge to the fundamental architecture of Israeli strategic deterrence. Israel's security doctrine, unspoken, never officially confirmed, but universally understood, rests on the assumption that its nuclear capability functions as an absolute backstop, a guarantee that no adversary can pursue its destruction to completion without triggering a catastrophic response. What Iran's sustained ballistic missile campaign is testing, systematically and deliberately, is whether that backstop can be physically compromised. If launchers can be positioned, pre-targeted, and fired in waves sufficient to defeat the outer layers of Israeli defense and strike Israeli nuclear infrastructure, even with conventional warheads, then Iran has effectively demonstrated that it can, at a moment of its choosing, replicate that targeting with something other than a conventional payload. That is the message embedded within this barrage. Not in diplomatic communications, not in public statements, in the mathematical language of ballistic trajectories and impact coordinates. The IDF's response to this reality has been unambiguous in its ambition. Military spokesman Brigadier General Effie Defrin stated in mid-March that the IDF still had thousands of identified targets inside Iran and was identifying new ones daily. By the IDF's own assessment, approximately 300 Iranian ballistic missile launchers had been destroyed since the beginning of the war. Joint U.S.-Israeli strikes had, by some intelligence estimates, eliminated up to 3/4 of Iran's pre-war launcher capacity. Iranian missile attack rates against Israel had fallen by more than 90% by the 10th day of the war, from peak barrages of approximately 90 missiles on the first day to 10 to 15 per day in the second week. And yet, even as Iran's capacity degraded, it continued to fire. Even with 3/4 of its launchers destroyed, Iran retained the capability to sustain a campaign of aerial pressure. And the salvos that continued, smaller in number but precisely targeted, included the strikes on Dimona and Arad that defeated Israeli interception. The lesson is direct and unambiguous. Degradation of launch capacity does not equal neutralization of the threat. A diminished arsenal that can still penetrate Israel's most advanced defensive layers at critical locations is not a defeated arsenal. It is an arsenal that has proven its strategic point. It is in this context that the IDF's authorization to strike senior Iranian and Hezbollah figures without the usual chain of prior approval, reported in mid-March, must be understood not as a routine adjustment in rules of engagement, but as a signal that the Israeli government had concluded the pace of strategic decision-making needed to match the pace of missile launches. The compression of the command chain carries its own risks. It accelerates. It reduces the gap between stimulus and response. And in a theater where a conventional missile striking near a nuclear facility represents a threshold event, the narrowing of decision-making timelines is among the most operationally dangerous developments of this entire conflict. The 600-missile threshold is not a ceiling. It is a precedent. Every strategic escalation in modern warfare is studied, absorbed, and incorporated into the adversary's future planning. When Iran launched 550 ballistic missiles at Israel during the 12-day war of June 2025, the world was stunned. Intelligence agencies revised their assessments, defense ministries updated their red lines, and Iran drew its own conclusions. Most importantly, that 550 missiles had not been sufficient to collapse Israel's defensive architecture or produce the degree of societal and military disruption that Iranian planners had calculated. The answer, from Tehran's perspective, was not to scale back. It was to scale up. 600 missiles represents that scaling. But it also represents something more analytically troubling, the confirmation that Iran's reconstituted launch infrastructure, rebuilt in the months between the June 2025 ceasefire and the February 2026 resumption of hostilities, was capable of sustaining barrages at this level despite the joint U.S.-Israeli suppression campaign. The IDF destroyed 300 launchers. Combined strikes eliminated up to 3/4 of Iran's capacity. And yet 600 missiles were still fired. That arithmetic has a name in strategic analysis: residual capability. And Iran's residual capability, even after the most intensive missile suppression campaign in the history of aerial warfare, has proven sufficient to conduct a saturation barrage that has wounded, displaced, and psychologically exhausted a civilian population of over 9 million people. The human dimension of this conflict must not be abstracted away in the language of strategy. By late April of 2026, at least 35 Israelis had been killed by Iranian missile fire and Hezbollah rocket attacks, with over 7,700 wounded. Among those deaths, 2 elderly residents in their 70s, killed by a cluster warhead striking a residential building in Ramat Gan, found just outside their safe room, centimeters from survival. 2 construction workers in Yehud, struck by submunitions in the open air of a building site, one killed immediately, the second dying the following day. 9 civilians killed in a single strike on a residential neighborhood in Beit Shemesh, the deadliest single missile impact on Israeli soil in this war. These are not abstractions. They are the irreversible human consequences of a strategic doctrine that uses ballistic missiles as instruments of mass civilian terror. Iran's deliberate deployment of cluster munition warheads, condemned by arms control experts as being used primarily to spread terror among a civilian population, represents not merely a legal violation in the view of international analysts. It represents a deliberate choice by Iranian military commanders to maximize the physical and psychological footprint of each missile beyond its point of impact. A cluster warhead disperses bomblets across an extensive area, transforming a single missile into dozens of simultaneous threats. It forces first responders, medical teams, and civilians to navigate an aftermath of unexploded ordnance that continues to wound long after the initial strike. The attack on Bnei Brak, which spread bomblets across an extensive residential neighborhood and critically injured an 11-year-old girl, was not an accident of targeting. It was the calculated application of a weapons system chosen for precisely that effect. On the Lebanese front, the picture is no less concerning. The IDF has achieved tactical success, eliminating Hezbollah commanders, capturing Radwan force operatives, striking weapons storage sites in Beirut and the BKOAA Valley. But Hezbollah's estimated 25,000 remaining missiles, its 1,000 drones, and its 3,000 fighters represent a force that has not yet been committed to the fight at its full capacity. The Lebanese government, formerly opposed to Hezbollah's military activities, finds itself governing a country whose most powerful armed actor is conducting an independent war from within its borders, and whose main patron has been striking Israeli territory without pause for weeks. The global economic dimension of this conflict has simultaneously reached critical thresholds. Iran's closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil shipments pass, has disrupted energy markets in ways the world had not experienced since the tanker wars of the 1980s. When Iran's Revolutionary Guards declared passage through Hormuz not allowed on the 28th of February, the ripple effects were immediate. War risk surcharges imposed on shipping, Gulf Cooperation Council nations struck by Iranian missiles for the first time in history, and U.S. naval assets engaged in enforcement operations that most NATO allies had publicly declined to support. The geopolitical isolation of the U.S.-Israeli campaign, conducted without formal NATO backing, with most Gulf states caught between dependence on Washington and vulnerability to Tehran, creates a strategic environment that no war game had fully modeled. And it is here, at this intersection of military saturation, economic disruption, nuclear proximity, and multi-front exhaustion, that the weight of what 600 Iranian and Hezbollah ballistic missiles truly represents must be confronted without comfort or euphemism. The IDF still has thousands of targets inside Iran. Iran still has missiles to fire. Hezbollah still has 25,000 projectiles in Lebanon. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested, and a missile, a conventional one in this instance, has already reached Dimona. The military planners who designed this campaign understood it would be long. They understood it would be costly. What is becoming clear in real time is that the full strategic cost of what has been set in motion has not yet been fully paid. The 600 missile barrage rocking Israel today is not the end of this escalation. It is a point on a trajectory that is still climbing. And where that trajectory terminates, militarily, geopolitically, and for the civilians on every side of every border in this theater, is the question that Part 5 of this analysis will answer without looking away.